The twin suns rose slowly over the horizon, casting long golden rays across the desert world. The sand shimmered as if it were made of fire, and every dune looked alive, shifting under the heat. For travelers who arrived here for the first time, the land looked endless and empty, yet Mira knew there was more hidden beneath these sands. The stories had reached her long before she ever saw this place with her own eyes. They spoke of an ancient tomb that had survived for ages, built by hands that were part human and part something else. Mira stood on the ridge of a dune and pulled her scarf tighter around her face. The wind was dry and sharp. Behind her, the rest of the crew struggled up the slope. Dalen was first to reach her side. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and carried the scanner across his back. He frowned at the sight of the desert stretching in every direction. "This world does not welcome strangers," he said in a calm voice. Mira's eyes stayed on the horizon where the suns met at a single glowing line. "No world welcomes strangers," she replied. "But every world remembers. That is why we are here." Their ship rested behind them, half buried in sand after last night's storm. The others had stayed behind to repair the landing gear, but Mira and Dalen had pressed forward, driven by the signal they had tracked across half the galaxy. It had led them here, to this desert planet, where the two suns burned endlessly. They walked down the dune and pressed deeper into the wasteland. The air shimmered with heat, and the ground cracked like broken glass under their boots. Hours passed without a single sign of life. Dalen kept checking the scanner, shaking his head at the emptiness. "Nothing but sand, rocks, and silence," he muttered. But Mira's step never slowed. She remembered the words of the archive she had studied back on the station. It had spoken of a tomb hidden beneath the endless sands of the twin suns. She trusted the archive more than the silence around her. At last, when the suns were high and the heat pressed like a heavy hand, they saw it. A sharp edge rose from the desert floor, too perfect to be natural. It was stone, cut smooth and shaped into a great block, half buried but unbroken by time. Dalen's eyes widened as he wiped sand from the surface. "This is no rock," he said softly. Mira knelt and traced the carved lines with her fingers. Strange symbols, part human and part unknown, covered the surface. They glowed faintly when her hand passed over them, as if the stone itself recognized her touch. Her heart beat faster. "The Pharaoh's tomb," she whispered. They circled the structure, uncovering more of it with their hands. Each stone was engraved with patterns that seemed to shift in the sunlight. The carvings showed tall figures standing beneath two suns, their heads crowned in golden circles. Some carried staffs. Others held out their hands toward stars in the sky. The images told a story, but neither Mira nor Dalen yet understood it. "We must tell the others," Dalen said, but Mira shook her head. "Not yet," she replied firmly. "If this is the tomb, then the entrance is close. We came here for truth, and truth does not wait." They pressed on, following the trail of stone blocks until they reached a narrow ridge. Beyond it, the ground dipped into a hollow where the sand had fallen away. There, half buried but shining in the twin light, stood a great doorway. The gate was higher than any ship bay, its frame carved with golden spirals that caught the sun. Dalen let out a slow breath. "This cannot be real." "It is real," Mira said. Her voice was quiet, filled with awe. "This place is older than any record we hold. Whoever built it wanted to be remembered forever. And now we stand here, proving they succeeded." The doorway was sealed by a slab of black stone that reflected the desert like a mirror. Mira stepped close and laid her hand upon it. The surface felt warm, almost alive. For a moment she thought she heard a hum deep within, a soft vibration that matched the beat of her heart. She drew back and looked at Dalen. "This is not just a tomb. It is a memory left for us to find." Dalen tightened the strap on his scanner and glanced at the shifting dunes around them. "Then we should be careful. A place like this does not stay hidden without reason." The suns moved higher, filling the desert with fierce light. The shadows of the gate stretched long and sharp across the hollow. Mira stood in that shadow and felt the weight of history pressing upon her. She thought of the ancient people who had walked here, who had built this place of stone and gold. They had burned bright under two suns, and though their voices had faded, their work still called across time. Mira smiled faintly. They wanted to be remembered. And now we remember. The wind rose again, carrying grains of sand across the carvings. The symbols seemed to dance under the shifting light. Mira and Dalen stood together before the gate, knowing this was only the beginning. The Pharaoh's tomb had waited through countless ages, and now it would tell its story to those who dared to listen. The suns hung high above, pouring heat into the hollow where Mira and Dalen stood before the great doorway. The black stone slab shone like glass, and the golden spirals carved into the frame seemed to move as the light struck them. The air around the gate felt different, heavy yet alive, as if the desert itself held its breath. Mira stepped closer, studying the surface with careful eyes. She traced the spiral carvings with her finger. The lines felt smooth, yet they warmed at her touch as though something beneath the stone responded to her presence. Dalen watched in silence, his scanner in hand, his brow furrowed as the device clicked and hummed. "There is energy here," he said at last. "Not natural energy. Something deep below is still awake." Mira nodded. She had expected as much. The ancient stories spoke of a place where the suns themselves gave power to the tomb. That power, it seemed, had not faded with time. They walked around the base of the doorway, brushing away layers of sand. The more they uncovered, the clearer the patterns became. The symbols were not random marks, but a language of images. Mira could see figures holding spheres of light, others guiding long ships that floated not on water but in the sky. These people were travelers, she said. They crossed more than deserts. They crossed the stars. Dalen crouched beside her, his hand brushing over an image of two suns carved above a crowned figure. If this is true, then they had knowledge far beyond ours at the time. How could they be forgotten? Mira's eyes lingered on the carving. The crowned figure stood proud beneath the twin suns, and all others bowed before it. Perhaps they chose to vanish, or perhaps they burned too bright and their light faded too soon. The thought made her shiver even under the heat of the day. They returned to the front of the gate. Dalen pressed his palm against the black stone and frowned. "It does not move. It does not break. Yet it feels alive." Mira studied the golden spirals once more. The design was not only decoration but also function. She noticed how the spirals bent inward, as if guiding something toward the center of the gate. She turned her gaze upward. The suns blazed fiercely above, their light spilling into the hollow. "Look at the shadows," she said. Dalen followed her eyes. The shadows of the spirals stretched across the stone, but they shifted slowly as the suns climbed higher. Mira realized the spirals were more than symbols. They were part of a design that worked with the light. "This gate was meant to open when the suns align," she whispered. Dalen's eyes widened. "Then it is a lock made of light itself." They waited as the day wore on. The heat grew sharper, and the hollow became an oven of sand and stone. Yet Mira's focus never left the golden lines. As the twin suns reached a perfect angle, their rays struck the spirals and filled them with glow. The carvings shimmered brighter and brighter until the light pooled at the center of the gate. The black stone trembled under the power. A low hum filled the air, steady like a heartbeat. Dalen stepped back, gripping his scanner, while Mira stood firm. She could feel the air shift as if the desert had become a living creature waking from sleep. Then, with a sound like stone grinding against stone, the slab split down the middle. A narrow crack of golden light cut across the surface, spreading slowly until the two halves moved apart. Mira's breath caught in her throat. Beyond the gate lay a passage leading into darkness. The air that spilled out was cool and dry, carrying a faint metallic taste. Dalen stared in disbelief. This place should not be standing after so many ages, yet it answers to the suns as if it were built yesterday. Mira's eyes shone with wonder. That is the power of memory. The builders wanted this place to last, and they shaped it with the stars themselves. They stepped into the passage. The floor was smooth, carved stone that gleamed faintly in the dim light. Symbols lined the walls, glowing softly as if awakened by their arrival. The air was still, untouched for countless years, but it did not feel dead. It felt watchful, as if the tomb itself knew they had entered. The passage sloped downward, leading them deeper beneath the desert. Dalen's scanner beeped constantly, overwhelmed by the flow of energy. He shook his head. The readings make no sense. There is enough power here to light a city. It is flowing through the walls. Mira touched the glowing symbols. They pulsed gently beneath her hand, warm and alive. She whispered, "It is not just power. It is a voice." As they continued, the walls widened into a chamber. The ceiling arched high above, covered in mosaics of shining gold. The artwork told stories of people walking under two suns, raising towers and reaching out into the endless sky. Their faces were carved with care, proud yet calm, as if they knew their legacy would outlast time. In the center of the chamber stood a tall pillar, wrapped in spirals of light that shimmered like liquid fire. Mira and Dalen stood in silence before it, awed by its beauty. "This is no simple tomb," Dalen said at last. "It is a monument, a library, and perhaps more." Mira's voice was steady, filled with quiet certainty. "It is a message left for us, and we are the ones who must listen." The chamber hummed softly around them. The journey into the Pharaoh's tomb had only begun, but already Mira felt the weight of its purpose. Humanity was not here by chance. The tomb had waited for them, guarded by the suns, carved with a memory too strong to fade. She looked at Dalen with calm resolve. "We must go deeper. Whatever truth rests here, it was meant to be found." And with that, they pressed forward into the heart of the tomb, unaware of what secrets still slept beneath the sands of the two suns. The chamber was silent at first, but it was not an empty silence. It felt like a pause before a voice spoke, a silence that waited to be broken. Mira and Dalen stood at the base of the glowing pillar, their eyes lifted toward the spirals of light that wrapped around it. The soft hum from the stone walls continued, steady and low, as though the place breathed with its own rhythm. Mira stepped closer to the pillar. She laid her palm against its surface. The light beneath her hand pulsed once, like the beat of a heart. She pulled back in surprise, but her eyes shone with wonder. "It feels alive," she whispered. Dalen adjusted the scanner, its screen filled with wild readings. "The energy here is not simple electricity. It carries patterns, almost like speech." Mira turned slowly, her gaze following the mosaics on the walls. Each golden tile reflected the light from the pillar, creating patterns that shifted across the chamber. The mosaics showed ships sailing across dark skies, towers rising on desert worlds, and crowned figures holding their hands toward the twin suns. "They left stories here," Mira said softly. "Not written in books, but in light, in stone, and in sound." As if answering her words, the chamber changed. The hum deepened, filling the air with vibration. The golden mosaics shimmered, and then, without warning, a voice filled the space. It was not a single voice, but many, layered together, echoing as though 1,000 speakers whispered at once. Dalen stepped back, eyes wide. "Do you hear that?" Mira nodded, her heart racing. The voice was not in any language she knew, but its rhythm carried meaning. The sound rose and fell like waves, and with each pulse the mosaics shifted. Figures seemed to move, their arms lifting, their ships gliding forward, their suns burning brighter. "This is not only a tomb," Mira said with certainty. "It is a memory that speaks." The echoes swirled around them, bouncing off the walls, folding back into the hum. Mira closed her eyes and tried to listen not with her ears but with her heart. Slowly, the strange sounds began to form into patterns she could follow. She opened her eyes again, and for the first time she thought she understood the story. "They burned bright," she said, her voice trembling. "Their people lived with power greater than any we have known. But the brighter the flame, the shorter the life. They knew their glory could not last." Dalen's gaze swept across the walls, watching the golden figures kneel before the crowned leader. The leader's crown shone like the suns themselves, radiant and proud. If they knew they would fade, why did they not preserve themselves? Mira walked slowly around the pillar, her hands brushing the carvings that lined its base. Perhaps they believed that memory was stronger than survival. They left this place not as a refuge but as a message to those who would come after. The chamber shifted again, the echoes grew louder, and a burst of golden light shot through the spirals of the pillar. Symbols lit up across the floor, forming a circle of fire around Mira and Dalen. For a moment, it felt as if the past itself had risen to surround them. The echoes spoke faster now, the rhythm urgent, the hum vibrating in their bones. Mira dropped to one knee, pressing her hand flat against the glowing floor, her mind filled with images, deserts filled with towers of gold, ships blazing across the stars, and then silence as the towers crumbled into sand. She gasped, pulling her hand away, but the images clung to her mind like a dream too vivid to forget. "They wanted us to see it," she said breathlessly. "Their rise and their fall. They wanted us to understand that light can guide, but it can also consume." Dalen stood tense, his jaw tight. "This place feels less like a story and more like a warning." The echoes softened, fading into the background hum again. The light of the pillar dimmed, though the symbols on the floor still glowed faintly. Mira rose to her feet, steadying herself with a deep breath. "A warning, yes," she said, "but also hope. They left their story not to frighten us, but to guide us. They wanted their flame to burn twice as bright. even if only for a short time, and now through memory that flame still burns. Dalen shook his head, trying to steady his thoughts. If this is only the first chamber, what else waits deeper inside? Mira looked toward the far wall. A narrow archway had appeared there, its outline traced in gold. Beyond it stretched another dark passage hidden until now. The chamber had shown them its story, and now it invited them to go further. We are meant to follow, Mira said with quiet determination. The air around them grew cooler as they stepped toward the archway. Behind them, the hum of the chamber faded into silence once more, leaving only the memory of the echoes. Mira glanced back at the glowing mosaics one last time. The figures stood frozen in their golden glory, their crowns shining forever beneath the suns. They are still speaking, she whispered, and we must keep listening. Together, she and Dalen passed through the archway, leaving behind the chamber of echoes. The desert above lay silent under the twin suns, but deep below, the tomb was only beginning to reveal its secrets. The new passage stretched long and narrow, its walls marked with faint lines that glowed like threads of fire. Mira and Dalen walked side by side, their steps echoing softly on the polished floor. The air was cooler here, but it carried a faint weight, as though something unseen pressed against them. This place is alive, Dalen said quietly. Every wall responds to us. Every stone feels like it is waiting. Mira ran her hand along the glowing lines. They pulsed faintly under her touch, like veins carrying light instead of blood. The builders shaped this place with purpose. Nothing here is by chance. The passage ended at a wide chamber. Its ceiling rose high with openings that allowed thin beams of sunlight to enter from above. Dust particles drifted through the light, glowing as they fell. In the center of the chamber stood a circle of tall mirrored plates, each angled differently, their surfaces reflecting the scattered rays of the suns. Mira's eyes widened with awe. This is not decoration. This is a device. Dalen scanned the mirrors. His screen showed tangled streams of energy bouncing from one plate to another. The light is caught in a puzzle, he said. It moves but never reaches its goal. Mira studied the arrangement. Some mirrors faced the beams directly, while others reflected light away. The air around the chamber hummed softly, as though it waited for them to act. This is a test, she said firmly. The suns are the key, but only if we guide them. Dalen frowned. And if we fail? Mira met his eyes. Then the tomb remained silent. But if we succeed, it will speak again. They began their work. Mira walked around the circle, adjusting the mirrors by hand. The polished plates were heavy but slid smoothly, as though built to move even after countless ages. Each time she turned one, the light shifted across the chamber. Beams scattered, merged, or vanished against the walls. Dalen watched carefully, pointing out where the light fell. There, he said as a beam struck a carved symbol on the far wall. The symbol glowed faintly before fading again. It wants balance, Mira nodded. Not one sun alone. Both must shine together. They adjusted more mirrors, guiding the rays of the twin suns. It was slow work, requiring patience and precision. At times the beams clashed, spilling light wildly across the floor. At other times they faded to nothing. Sweat gathered on Mira's brow, though the air was cool. She felt the weight of the task pressing upon her. Finally, a moment of harmony came. Two beams, one golden and one white, crossed the chamber and struck the same symbol together. The symbol flared with bright light, filling the room with a warm glow. The floor trembled beneath them. The mirrors shifted slightly, as though acknowledging their effort. A new set of symbols appeared on the walls, glowing softly. Dalen's eyes widened. It is not only about alignment. It is about rhythm. The suns move, and the mirrors must move with them. The challenge grew harder. The beams shifted as the suns rose higher in the sky above. Mira and Dalen hurried to adjust the mirrors again, chasing the changing light. Their movements became a dance, fast but careful, guiding the rays across the chamber. At last, the beams converged in the center of the room. They struck the floor, forming a circle of brilliance that spread outward like ripples on water. The mirrors glowed, their surfaces blazing with energy, and the hum of the chamber rose into a steady song. Mira stepped back, her chest rising and falling with heavy breaths. "We did it," she whispered. The light circle expanded, revealing a new path. A section of the far wall melted away, opening into another passage lined with glowing symbols. The chamber had rewarded their effort, granting them the right to continue. Dalen lowered his scanner, his face calm but thoughtful. This was more than a puzzle. It was a judgment. The builders wanted to know if we could learn, if we could think with patience rather than force. Mira looked around at the mirrors still glowing in the sunlight. They trusted that someone would come who valued reason. This was their test of worthiness. As they stepped toward the new passage, the mirrors slowly dimmed, their task complete. Yet the memory of the light remained, burned into their minds like the warmth of the twin suns. The passage ahead was darker, but the glowing symbols along its walls guided their way. Mira felt a quiet strength within her. Each test brought them closer not only to the secrets of the tomb, but also to the truth of why it had been built. They shaped this place to teach, she said as they walked. To remind those who came after that light is not only power, it is also wisdom. Dalen glanced at her with respect. And you guided us through it, Mira shook her head. We guided each other. That is what the builders wanted us to understand. The new passage grew wider as they advanced, the walls filled with fresher carvings. The images showed not only triumph but also decline. Towers toppled, ships fell silent, and the suns dimmed in the sky. The golden figures stood still, their crowns lowered, their hands empty. Dalen slowed his steps. Their glory did not last. Mira touched one of the carvings, her voice soft. They knew it would not, but they wanted us to see their path and choose differently. The glow from the carvings lit their faces as they pressed forward into the deep heart of the tomb. The test of light had ended, but the lesson lingered. The builders had burned twice as bright, and their memory still guided the steps of those willing to listen. The new passage led them deeper into the heart of the tomb. The air grew cooler, and the sound of their footsteps echoed softly against the stone walls. The glowing symbols guided their way, each one pulsing faintly as if marking their progress. Mira and Dalen walked in silence, their thoughts heavy with the lessons of the chamber behind them. At last, the passage widened into a vast hall. The ceiling stretched so high that it seemed to vanish into shadows. Along the walls stood tall statues carved from black stone, each crowned with golden circles. Their eyes were made of polished gems that reflected the light of the symbols, giving the impression that the statues watched every movement. Mira's breath caught at the sight. This is their Hall of Kings, she said softly. They wanted their leaders to stand forever in memory. Dalen walked slowly between the statues, his hand brushing the carved details of their robes. Each face is different, he said. These were real people, not myths. They lived, they ruled, and now they stand guard over what remains. At the far end of the hall stood a great archway sealed by a door of gold. Unlike the black stone gate they had opened before, this one shone brightly even in the dim chamber, its surface covered with intricate patterns that spiraled inward like the rays of the suns. Mira stepped forward, awe in her eyes. The golden vault, she whispered. The door pulsed faintly as they approached. Light flickered along the carvings, chasing itself in circles. Mira reached out her hand but stopped short, glancing at Dalen. He gave a slow nod, and together they pressed their palms against the shining surface. The vault responded at once. A soft hum rose from the floor, spreading through the walls. The golden carvings blazed with light, and the door began to slide open. It moved with perfect smoothness, as though untouched by the long ages of sand and silence. When the vault revealed its interior, both Mira and Dalen stood frozen in awe. Inside lay rows upon rows of golden ingots, stacked neatly in towers that glowed faintly from within. Each ingot was etched with fine lines, patterns that shimmered like rivers of fire. The glow was gentle but alive, as if the gold carried not only metal but also memory. Mira stepped inside, her footsteps slow and careful. She picked up one of the ingots and held it in her hands. The surface was warm, and the patterns seemed to shift under her touch, rearranging themselves into shapes and words she could almost understand. It is more than gold, she said. It holds knowledge. Dalen lifted another ingot, his scanner flashing wildly as it tried to read the signals. The patterns carry information, he said. Not like books or data crystals. This is memory stored in the very metal. Energy and history combined. Mira's eyes widened. They placed their story into the gold itself. Every ingot is a voice waiting to be heard. The chamber glowed softly around them, filled with the light of countless voices from the past. Mira imagined the builders working with careful hands, pouring not only their wealth but their wisdom into these shapes. It was not treasure for kings. It was a library, a vault of memory that could never fade. They gave up the endless rule of empires, she whispered, and chose instead to leave a legacy of light. Dalen frowned thoughtfully, holding the ingot closer. But why gold? Why something so heavy, so bound to the earth? Mira smiled faintly. Because gold endures. It does not rust, it does not decay. They chose it to carry their flame across the ages. They knew time would wear away their towers, but the gold would remain. They set the ingots back in place and looked around the chamber. The vault stretched far beyond sight, its golden towers forming a shining forest of memory. At the center of the hall stood a pedestal carved from black stone, upon which rested a single larger ingot. It glowed brighter than the rest, its surface alive with moving light. Mira approached it slowly. The air around it hummed with power. She placed her hand gently upon its surface, and at once her mind filled with visions. She saw the twin suns blazing over vast cities of gold, their towers glittering like fire. She saw ships soaring into the stars, carrying the hopes of a proud people. And then she saw their fall. Suns dimming, towers crumbling, silence spreading where once there had been song. Tears filled her eyes as the vision faded. She pulled her hand away and whispered, "They burned twice as bright, and they knew it could not last." Dalen stood beside her, his voice low. "They chose to leave this behind, not as power but as memory. They wanted us to learn from their flame." The two of them stood in silence before the great ingot. Around them, the vault shone with quiet light, as though the voices of the past still whispered in the golden glow. Mira turned to Dalen with steady eyes. "This is their gift, but it is also their question. What will we do with it?" Dalen looked back at the towers of gold. "The answer may change everything, but it must be chosen wisely." Together they stepped back, the weight of the vault pressing upon their hearts. They knew now that the tomb was not only a monument but a message left for humanity. The builders had given their light freely. The choice of how to use it would belong to those who came after. The golden vault glowed softly behind them, eternal and patient, waiting for its lesson to be carried forward. The glow of the golden vault lingered in Mira's eyes even as she and Dalen stepped back from the central ingot. The light was warm but heavy, as if each beam carried the burden of centuries. Around them, the towers of golden ingots stood in silent rows, holding the memory of a people who had burned with unmatched brilliance. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The chamber itself seemed to wait, offering them no sound except the faint hum of the gold. At last Dalen broke the silence. "This is more power than we can measure," he said. "One ingot could fuel our cities for a lifetime. 10 could change entire worlds. And here we have thousands." Mira looked at him, her brow tense. "It is not just power. It is history. It is their legacy. If we take it only as energy, we strip away what they wanted us to learn." Dalen's jaw tightened. He turned the scanner toward the nearest tower, watching the numbers rise endlessly across the screen. "Do you know how many colonies are struggling? How many ships drift because their cores are weak? With this, we could bring light to every corner of human space." Mira stepped closer, her voice calm but steady. "And at what cost? If we treat their memory as fuel, we destroy the message they left. They did not build this place to be mined. They built it to be remembered." The two of them stood in the glowing chamber, caught between need and respect. The silence pressed harder, as if the tomb itself listened for their choice. Dalen sighed and lowered the scanner. "You always look at the meaning first. I look at survival. Perhaps that is my flaw." Mira placed her hand on one of the glowing ingots. The pattern shifted faintly beneath her touch, forming shapes that almost looked like suns. "No, it is not a flaw. It is human. We want to live and we want to thrive. But sometimes we must ask ourselves why we live and what it means to thrive. That is what they are asking us here." Dalen studied her expression, then turned back to the great ingot at the center. Its light seemed brighter than before, almost as if it pulsed with their words. He walked toward it and placed his palm upon its surface. His eyes widened as visions filled his mind. Ships bursting with energy, weapons glowing with destructive light, cities burning too brightly until they collapsed into ash. He pulled his hand away, his face pale. "They warned us," he whispered. "They showed me what happens when power is used without thought. It is not only survival it offers, it is temptation." Mira nodded gently. "And that is why they sealed it in this tomb, to remind us that choice is heavier than any treasure." They sat together on the smooth stone floor, the light of the vault bathing them in soft gold. For the first time since entering the tomb, Mira felt the weight of responsibility pressing more strongly than curiosity. It was not about unlocking puzzles or walking through chambers. It was about deciding what kind of people they would be. "What will we tell the others?" Dalen asked quietly. "The truth," Mira said. "That we found a vault of memory, not a vault of fuel. That it is sacred, not to be broken apart." "And if they refuse?" he asked. "If they see only the gold, not the lesson?" Mira looked up at the statues carved in the hall outside, their stone faces calm and watchful. "Then we remind them. We remind them that humanity must carry more than hunger for power. We must carry wisdom too." The chamber dimmed slightly as if the vault itself grew calm with their decision. The golden towers glowed steady, no longer shifting or restless. Mira felt as though the builders long gone had heard their choice and approved. Dalen rose to his feet, stronger now. "We will take only a fragment. Enough to study, enough to prove what we found. The rest stays here untouched as they intended." Mira smiled faintly. "Yes, we will carry the memory forward without taking the flame from its resting place." Together they turned toward the vault door. As they reached it, the golden carvings pulsed one last time, bright and clear, casting their shadows across the chamber. It felt like a farewell, a blessing from the past to the future. The door slid closed behind them, sealing the golden vault once more in silence. The Hall of Kings stood watch as they walked back through the statues, their faces steady, their crowns glowing faintly in the reflected light. When they reached the passage leading upward, Mira paused and looked back. "They trusted us with their story," she said softly. "We cannot fail them." Dalen placed a hand on her shoulder. "We will not. Their memory will guide us just as the suns guided their mirrors." They continued upward, the glow fading behind them. The weight of choice stayed heavy on their shoulders, but it was no longer a burden of fear. It was a burden of honor. They had chosen not to take, but to preserve. Not to burn, but to remember. The tomb was not only a place of the past, it had become a mirror for the present. In the glow of the golden vault, Mira and Dalen had seen the truth, that humanity's greatness would not be measured by how much power it held, but by how wisely it carried the light. The climb back through the long passages was slow. The glowing symbols on the walls seemed softer now, less urgent, as if the tomb itself had grown calm after hearing their decision. Mira and Dalen moved together in silence, their hearts still heavy with the vision of the golden vault. When they finally reached the great black gate that opened into the desert hollow, the twin suns were already beginning to lower in the sky. Their rays painted the sand with a warm red glow, and the air shimmered gently with fading heat. Mira stepped into the open and drew a long breath of desert wind. It tasted of dust and memory. Behind her, Dalen emerged and stood at the base of the gate. He turned to look back at the dark passage they had left. The golden carvings no longer glowed, and the silence of the tomb was complete once more. "It is sleeping again," he said quietly. Mira nodded. "It will wait for others as it waited for us. But now it carries our promise too." Their ship, half buried in sand, stood not far from the hollow. The crew had finished repairs and waited for them with questions in their eyes. As Mira and Dalen approached, the others hurried forward. "You were gone for hours," one said. "What did you find? Was there treasure?" "There was treasure," Dalen answered carefully, "but not the kind you expect. It is not meant to be taken." The crew looked at him with confusion, but Mira spoke before anyone could press further. "We found a vault of memory, gold filled with the voices of a people who lived under two suns. They left it not for wealth, not for power, but for remembrance." The crew exchanged uneasy glances. One frowned and asked, "Then what do we bring back? If there is no power, no gain, what use is it?" Mira held up the small fragment of gold they had taken from the vault. It glowed softly in her hand, patterns shifting across its surface like rivers of light. "We bring back this. A piece of their story, enough to prove that the tomb is real, enough to remind us of what they chose to leave behind." The crew fell silent. The fragment's glow reflected in their eyes, and for a moment even the most doubtful among them felt the weight of its meaning. That night, they prepared to depart. As the ship lifted slowly from the sand, the twin suns lowered together toward the horizon. Their light joined in a single brilliant blaze, casting long shadows across the desert. From above, the tomb's outline was barely visible beneath the dunes, hidden yet eternal. Mira watched through the viewport, her gaze fixed on the glowing horizon. "They are watching," she whispered. Dalen stood beside her, his voice steady. The suns remember, and now so do we. The ship rose higher, breaking through the thin clouds of the desert world. The stars spread out before them, endless and silent, waiting to carry their journey forward. The golden fragment lay secured in the center of the cabin, its faint light a quiet reminder of the vault below. Days later, as they crossed into deep space, Mira sat with the fragment resting in her hands. Each time she touched its surface, she felt the same warmth, the same gentle hum of memory. She could almost hear voices within it, proud voices that refused to be forgotten. "Their flame has not ended," she said softly to Dalen. "It burns still, through us." He nodded. "And it will guide others if we keep it safe." When they finally reached their station, word of the discovery spread quickly. Many argued, some in awe, some in greed. There were those who wished to return and harvest the vault, believing the energy could change the future of every colony. But Mira and Dalen stood firm. "This is not fuel," Mira told them. "It is wisdom. If you strip it of meaning, you lose what makes it powerful. The builders gave us a lesson, not a gift to waste." Her words stirred debate, but the fragment's glow spoke louder than any voice. It carried a presence that silenced greed, reminding all who saw it that the past was watching. In the months that followed, the story of the Pharaoh's tomb spread across human space. Not as a tale of treasure, but as a tale of memory and choice. It became a reminder that light can build or destroy, guide or consume. Humanity had been given the chance to choose, and the tomb's first visitors had chosen to preserve. One evening, Mira stood alone on the station balcony, gazing at the stars. She thought of the two suns burning together in the desert sky. They had shone for ages before she arrived, and they would shine long after she was gone. Yet for a brief time, their light had guided her into the heart of a tomb that carried both warning and hope. Dalen joined her, carrying the fragment. He placed it gently on the railing between them where it glowed against the starlight. "It is small," he said, "but it carries the weight of a people. That is more than any empire could leave behind." Mira smiled faintly. "Yes, and now it carries us too." They stood together in silence, watching the fragment's glow mingle with the stars. Somewhere far away, the desert of the two suns lay quiet, its tomb sealed once more, its golden vault waiting with patience beyond time. The suns remembered, and now so would humanity.